Book of Judges, we're talking about Gideon. We started that looking at him, finished up the Song of Deborah and Barak, and then started talking about Gideon last week, and we're down to about verse 7 to begin for our class today. And of course, Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. It's what we talked about last week. They are punished by the Midianites and the Amalekites who were coming in and stealing everything, and what was left over they destroyed. And so Israel was in terrible shape, and that lasted for 7 years till they finally came out and asked God's help again, which is kind of their pattern of behavior that we've talked about throughout the book of Judges so far, and will continue to do so throughout the end of the book. And it came to pass when the children of Israel cried out to the Lord because of the Midianites, that the Lord sent a prophet to the children of Israel, who said to them, "Thus says the Lord God of Israel, I brought you up from Egypt, brought you out of the house of bondage. I delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians and out of the hand of all who oppressed you, and drove them out before you and gave you their land. Also I said to you, I am the Lord your God. Do not fear the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell, but you have not obeyed my voice." What's different about God's response than what we've had in the previous Judges, as far as how he responds to them, according to what we just read?
A little more severe.
A little more severe. But notice he sent a prophet before he picked a judge. And that's something that Deborah was a prophetess and a judge. So that technically, this isn't the first one, but he specifically sent a prophet before he did anything to help them and pointed out a whole bunch of things to them. And here's the list of the things he said. Number 1, I'm the Lord your God. He says that at the end, but that's the overarching thing that they needed to remember. I am the Lord your God. I brought you out of Egypt. I brought you out of the house of bondage. I delivered you out of the hands of the Egyptians. I delivered you out of the hands of all who oppressed you. I drove them out before you, and I gave you their land. Now, why is God rehearsing all of this for them? Reminding, okay. It's like, how do you forget this stuff? How do you forget what I've done for you? For all that I've done for you. And even during the time of the judges, you're forgetting that I've delivered you from the hand of the enemies that have oppressed you. And again, you're the reason it happened because you're not following me. I've done all these things for you, and you're not doing what I told you you're supposed to do. So all of these things he rehearses for them, that they should remember that. And it's a good lesson for us to remember what God's done for us. And mainly and first and foremost, what's he done for us that we need to remember all the time?
His son died.
His son died for us. We'll remember that in the Lord's Supper this morning. We do that every Sunday morning. And so we'll remember that. And we need to remember what God's done for us and let that adapt and modify and shape our behavior and how we live according to his will rather than to, as well as in the day of Judges, everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And so it's an important reminder for them. I am the Lord your God. Yes?
Brother, I'll say he died. He did not just die. He suffered. Humiliated. And how can we forget what he did for us?
Right. Yeah. He didn't just die peacefully in his sleep or anything like that. It was a miserable, horrible, terrible, traumatic death. And we can't even begin to imagine what he went through in all of that. And it started after he was arrested with the beatings and the mistreatment and all of that. Historians tell us that a lot of times the individuals didn't survive the beatings. They never made it to the crucifixion because they were so badly beaten they just didn't survive. And so Jesus survived enough to get to the cross and then had to go through that agony on the cross. So we need to remember that in our everyday lives and what he's done for us. So when Kevin asks himself, what should I do? Well, what I should do is in light of what he's done already for me. So, I am the Lord your God. Do not fear the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. What's the message of that phrase? You're living in the land of the Amorites, yet you fear their God, and yet you live in their land. What's their God been able to do to you? What's their God done for you? That seems to be the message there. Look, you're living in their land and you're afraid of their gods? How does that work? I am the Lord your God, is what he said. And so that idea that you're in this land that this other God supposedly has the power to do something about, and obviously that God's not doing anything because, well, number one, there is no such thing. Elwood?
Well, the thing we have to remember is that these people decided to mess around with their rights in the first place. Israel, they're attracted to their women, and I'll tell you what, well, I'm not going to say that, but they fell into a situation where the girls had convinced them that, hey, this is the God you really need to serve, and I'll take care of you. And we have to remember that God says, hey, as long as you're not sinning and you're keeping your life together, I'll take care of you. So when everything is going great for them, like we were saying the obvious other times, it's the same thing that gets repeated over and over and over. And I just think it's very interesting that a lot of times we take the human factors out of that because it's like they said, they intermarry. So what happens, it's just like these days, it's difficult for, say, a Jewish person and a Catholic person to marry because either one side or the other is saying, you cannot do that. But if the people love each other enough, they're going to do it anyway. And this is what happened here. Once you're in that track and you start having children, you're committed to the real, and that's why it lasts so many years too, because the kids are growing up saying, what is going on here?
Well, and they're being raised up in it. They're being raised up in the worship of Baal and the Asherah. So that's what they know. And then all of a sudden God gets back into the scene and they've got to be re-educated about what God expects of them and what God has done for them. And so that's another aspect of this is why it was generational and not just one group of people, but it kept happening over and over again with these people. So you live in the land of this God you're afraid of because I gave it to you. That was the main message there. But you have not obeyed my voice. And there's the close the book of Judges, and we understand everything about it now. You have not obeyed my voice. That's the key. And when we don't obey God's voice, bad things happen. And we see that in our world today. We see it sometimes in the church even. When we don't do what God has asked us to do, it's a bad thing. Thoughts, comments, questions? All right. Now the angel of the Lord came and sat under the terebinth tree, which was in Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, while his son Gideon threshed wheat in the winepresses in order to hide it from the Midianites. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, the Lord is with you, you mighty man of valor. And Gideon said to him, O my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? And where are all his miracles which our fathers told us about, saying, did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord has forsaken us and delivered us into the hands of the Midianites. So, number one, there's a map that represents maybe the location of Ophrah. We're not sure. You get 2 or 3 different maps, and it's going to be in 2 or 3 different places because they're not really sure which town is Ophrah. But that's the predominant location that's given, and you notice it's right there at the Jezreel Valley, which is where all of the story of Gideon is going to take place, down in that valley with the fight that's going on right there. And this is modern Ophrah. It's a Palestinian village called Taba. And the interesting thing about Taba is it's the only all-Christian Palestinian village in Israel. And by Christian, use that in the broadest sense of the term, but kind of interesting that's what that has to do with what we're talking about now. Absolutely nothing, but it's interesting to know that it's a city that still exists. They're in the same spot. This is where all this happened. Have not found any archaeological evidence of the wine press or anything that we talk about. It's buried under something, probably got a house built on top of it or something. But anyway, that's what the area looks like today. While his son Gideon was threshing wheat in the winepress in order to hide it from the Midianites. That's how desperate things were. And here's a picture, and this is not Gideon's wine press. This is another wine press. In fact, all of these would date later than the time we're talking about here. But you notice the little hole at the top, and that's where they would crush the grapes, and then the juice would run down into that vat. And I'm guessing that that's where Gideon would have been, down in that hole, so nobody could see him threshing the wheat. And that way, the Midianites are in the area. Maybe he could get enough of it to hide away so that they wouldn't starve to death. Here's another picture of a larger wine press, bigger one in the land of Israel, and yet another one here, a much smaller one. So Gideon's there in the wine press. He's thrashing his wheat, and that's where the angel of the Lord comes to have a chat with him. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said, "The Lord is with you, you mighty man of valor." All right, mighty man of valor. You remember what Gideon's response is? Who are you talking about? He didn't think of himself as a mighty man of valor. He didn't think he was the one that the angel should be talking to. But the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, "The Lord is with you, you mighty man of valor." And Gideon said to him, "O my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? And why were all his miracles which our fathers told us about, saying, Did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord has forsaken us and delivered us into the hand of the Midianites." Just a real quick exercise here. All the terms Lord that are going to be highlighted in green is the name for Jehovah. And then the one highlighted in yellow is a different term. It's the term Adon rather than Jehovah. And it's more of the idea of Lord, a king, a prince. So when Gideon is talking about the Lord, he talks about the Lord, but when he addresses this angel of the Lord, he calls him Lord in the sense of the word Adon there. And so he doesn't acknowledge him directly as God, but as a Lord. And go ahead. Yes, right. This is a term of respect. It's a term of admiration. It's a term of you're higher, more noble than me, and so that's the term that he uses there. And all the other terms there are for Jehovah. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. First question I'm asking: was Gideon blaming God?
It's interesting that Gideon is so oblivious to what's going on.
Okay.
And we overlook our faults very easily.
Yeah. So Gideon says, if God's with us, why is this happening? Flo?
Well, it's interesting because every time God punishes Israel, they didn't get it. Mm-hmm. And they still didn't get it. Every time he punished us, they abandoned us. But it was because they were worshiping other gods. They were disobeying, and it was always their fault. They always turned it around. Well, God bless us. And it was their doing. They only doing. They never got it.
Yeah. It was just a continual thing. It's like, God, it's your fault. And God saying through the prophet, he said, no, it's your fault. Why? Because you didn't obey my voice. Ellen?
Yes, and it applies just because he says that I discipline those I love. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we look up at the sky and we say, God, why are you doing this? Mm-hmm. Why is this happening to me? I'm trying to walk your path, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, and yet I'm going through all these situations that are just killing me. And all of a sudden you realize, when you start looking into yourself, you're the one that's making a mistake. And he's punishing us because he loves us. And sometimes, like Phil's saying, we don't realize that he's punishing us.
Exactly. And again, he recounted the things in that slide a couple of slides ago, all the things he'd done for them. And Gideon is admitting that he knows those things. I know you brought us that. I know all of that, but why is this happening now? And again, the answer simply was because you're not doing what I told you to do. You're being disobedient, and that's the answer right there. Now, next question. Is it ever right to question God? I've heard two answers. I've heard yes, and I've heard no. Vicki?
I think there's a difference
Okay.
I think questioning God did show a human response. I think that's different from blaming God.
Okay.
Question God without blaming God.
All right. All right. So Vicky says there's a difference between questioning God and blaming God. And Gideon was obviously, at this point, blaming God. God, this is your fault. What you've been doing. John?
Asking a question to try and understand is one thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think the other side of it is kind of how where Job got at one point, where he was almost challenging him, saying, you know, I deserve this, or I don't deserve what you've done to me. And God said, where were you? Like,
Yeah.
You know, so there's that.
Yeah. So it's, are we going to question what's happening in our lives? Yes. Can't help it. And we should. We should. Back to Owen's comment, if something's going wrong, why is this happening? Maybe it's something I've done. Maybe I've made a bad decision or a poor choice in my life, and I'm dealing with the consequences of that. Or maybe it has nothing to do with me, and it's something else that happened out there that I'm experiencing the consequences of. But the question, why is this happening, is really an exercise in self-evaluation, isn't it? Let's look at this situation. Let's figure out what's going on in this situation, figure out the cause of it so that we can fix it if that's possible. Marcia?
Well, in James it says your trials make you stronger.
Right.
So, you could go all through the Old Testament and New Testament and see that's actually very true.
Right. Our trials make us stronger. James says that, and gives us patience and perseverance and all of that stuff. And so they can be useful and helpful to us in our lives. And again, maybe it's trials that I've caused myself, or maybe it's trials that somebody else has caused. Amy?
You know what Gideon, it is obvious from his conversation with the angel that he doesn't see he seems to miss the boat.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a comment made that sometimes we overlook our faults. In a situation where something keeps happening and we're not sure why it's happening, if it's something from us or it's just unfortunate or a combination, how does one go in to see the accurately if it's that person's contribution? It's not outright sin, but how does one find to find an answer like Gideon? If you're the problem or someone else's problem, or it just is.
Yeah. Good question. How do you determine? How does Kevin determine, okay, Kevin, this is your fault? How do you do that?
Well, you evaluate.
Okay.
And then, I mean, you're not going to have an answer, but right is to remind us what God's done in the past and his promises and our knowledge about he disciplines us if we're sinning to get us back. And if that's not accurate, then that's where our faith comes.
Okay. So, go ahead, Redempta.
You have to admit that that's their Bible thing, and you compare your life to that.
Okay.
Like Gideon did, and he said, he wrote these things.
Yeah. All right. Would you have a comment?
Yes, there's a difference between our sin and what is a result of that and God's punishment, and trials and tribulations. Because we are put through trials and tribulations, and I've experienced myself, because there are some things that I do not want to correct in my life. God's going to give me something to say, hey, you know what, you did good over here, but there's something bigger down the road that you're going to have to deal with. So I'm going to put this thorn in your side for a little while until you you understand what I'm trying to teach.
So you're strong enough to deal with what's coming down the road. Yeah. Again, back to Redempta's comment. It's how do I evaluate if I'm the cause of the problem? Well, number one, what has God told me to do? And I need to evaluate, is that what I'm doing? Am I doing what he's told me to do? And what is it that he's told me to do that I'm not doing? Or as Elvin said, I just don't want to do. I just made up my mind I don't want to do that. And so if I find those, then that may be the areas that I need to work on in my life so that it can't be said of me, you didn't obey my voice. And so that's that self-evaluation. And again, maybe I'm doing some things wrong and something happens, like our brother Steve Forrest hit by another car yesterday. As far as I know, it was no fault of his own. Somebody else did something wrong. So I can evaluate my life all I want to, and but I think I'm doing pretty good. Somebody else made a bad choice, and the end result was I got hurt over it. Glenn?
Don't you think, though, this is the beginning, really? You know, God has a plan, and He's going to bring those Israelites back, and through them, Christ is going to come.
Mm-hmm.
We have all the answers now. They didn't.
Mm-hmm.
For them to ask God a question seems a little bit more appropriate to
Okay.
us.
All right.
Because we have all the answers.
All right. Glenn makes the good point that because of where we live and the time we live and scripture that we have that's been revealed, we have the answers. We have the end of the story told, how it's going to turn out, what the last page of the story is going to be. And so we know that, and these people didn't at that point in time. So for them to question maybe is a little more, shall we say, understandable, maybe more reasonable than for us who know the end of the story. So, Flo?
You know, wondering what happens in our lives every day is, I think reevaluating our lives every day is one thing versus what happens in our life when God is in control. If I really believe and trust that God is in control of all things around me and in my life, who am I to question His will?
Right.
So I think they're two different things. And reevaluating our lives every day when we make mistakes, whether it's good or bad, it's good because we need to keep checking ourselves. But it has nothing to do with God's will.
Right. Right. Absolutely.
God's will, what happens around us in this world, He controls everything. You really believe that?
Yeah.
I don't think we can question that.
Right. And going back, John brought up Job. I mean, how did Job get in the situation he was in? God allowed him to be there, didn't he? Satan came and accused God. God said, "Have you considered Job?" He said, "Yeah, you let me loose on him and he'll deny you." And God said, "No, he won't." And he didn't. He questioned, and I'm sure there was thoughts that went through his mind that have gone through our mind about why all this has happened, and this is not fair, and this is not right. But it was still God's will that happened. And yet, Job came out of it, what, stronger than he was before all this happened. Redemptive?
He did say, though, Job did say, whatever happens, I trust God.
Yeah, and that was the end result. No matter what's happened, I'm going to trust God. And he had lots, can't think of anything else that could have happened to him other than him dying, and yet he still trusted God. Ellen?
Yeah, in the case of my daughter, and I know a lot of us have had this happen to us, we raise our children in the church. She meets a guy and she wants to marry him. He's not church. He doesn't even believe in God. And you and everybody else is kind of saying, you need to marry someone in the church. Because I can see right now, this is your dad speaking, I understand what's going on here. This man drinks. This man curses like a sailor. And I said, you want to marry him and raise children? And I said, is he going to go to church? Oh, yes, Daddy, I can convince him to go. And then I look where she is today. She's miserable. And I hate to see that happening to her in her life. And it just causes so many problems. And this is one of the things that we have to suffer through as a result of sin of our children or friends or the lost. So, it's the things that happen to them are the same things that are happening to us today.
Yeah, and it all boils down to not doing God's will. That's the end of it. That's the whole summary of it there. So the Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the might of yours, and you shall save Israel from the hand of the Midianites. Have I not sent you?" Notice the wording here. And I'm going to make a little bit of this, and I may be making too much of this. I don't know. You can tell me what you think. Who's speaking to him right now? The angel of the Lord. But notice what it says there. Then the Lord turned to him and said, "Go in this might." Now, is the way this is written just saying, well, the angel of the Lord is telling him what God's words are and speaking for God? Or is it, in a sense, the angel of the Lord was the Lord himself there with him at that point in time? What do you think? I can't answer the question, so there's no wrong answer here. What do you think? We can't either, okay. Ellen?
Well, Christ was always there with God.
Mm-hmm.
The angel of the Lord Jehovah, the capital L makes a big difference.
Yeah.
Because even if, when we see God said he or his or whatever, it's usually capitalized. So since Jesus was there as the rock that the water gushed out, so that implies something in itself.
Yeah.
Because we learn that in the New Testament.
Yeah.
But the point is that you have 3 in 1 here. You've got a spirit, you've got Christ, and you've got God. And they interact with each other throughout the whole Bible. It's not like, oh, gee, all of a sudden we discovered Jesus in the New Testament. No, he was there in the beginning, before the creation.
Right. Yeah. So we're dealing with a question we can't answer. But I'm going to make a point of this in a little bit because I think it's a valid point to be made in just a few slides, not on these slides. But again, going back to that slide, this particular slide, have I not sent you? Now, that sounds like you're sent. Go. Remember when we were talking about Deborah and Barak? That same phraseology was used. Have I not sent you? And we discussed the idea, well, had he already been told what to do? Or was this just a way of saying it? And we couldn't answer that question because there's no real answer to that. But go in this might, save Israel from the hand, because I sent you. Because I gave you this land, and you're afraid of the gods of this land, but I gave it to you. You're living in it right now. I've sent you. This is a done deal. This is going to be a piece of cake because I'm the one doing the fighting. I'm the one doing the work. You're just going to be my agent. You're going to be my messenger. You're going to be the physical presence of me in doing this. Have I not sent you? And if we want to look at that in the past tense for us, a lesson for us, go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. We've been sent. And it wasn't past tense. We have been sent. The question is, are we going to go? Are we going and doing what we've been asked to do and preaching the gospel to every creature? I watched the video, and this video may turn into a sermon at some point in the future, but done by a fellow through World Video Bible School. And he was making the argument, it was a video about evangelism. And he started off the video and said, write down these numbers, 2069. So you know what those numbers are? That's the year 2069. And if the church's rate of decline continues, that will be the date at which the church no longer exists, in his estimation. Now, is that frightening? Troubling, isn't it? And then he goes on to talk about evangelism and why the church can prosper if we're out doing what we're supposed to be doing, because we've been sent. Glenn, go ahead.
Back up when it talked in verse 7, it said God sent a prophet. Is the prophet and the angel the same person? Okay.
Glenn asked, is the prophet and the angel the same thing? Everybody's kind of doing this. I don't know. I'll come down on one side. I'm going to say two different things because it's mentioned prophet and then the angel of the Lord. Could it be one and the same? Sure. Could be. But it could be that he sent a prophet. They didn't hear the prophet, so he sends the angel of the Lord to get Gideon going on doing what he needed to do. Renetta.
In Daniel chapter 2, does it say that God's church will never be destroyed?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So 69 doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, but it doesn't. But it's a frightening thought, isn't it? When you look at the statistics and the downward decline of that is.
But you can listen to Nostradamus.
Yeah. Correct. Correct. Glenn?
But in Romans, he said there's always going to be a remnant.
Yeah, always a remnant. So, well, and this guy in the video pointed out that he was talking about in the United States of America. He said, what would it be like for India to have to come and evangelize the United States? Because the church is growing there. Nigeria to come and evangelize the United States. Read.
In that verse 7, he said he sent a prophet. It sounded like they didn't listen to him.
Yeah.
And then 11 says, then the angel of the Lord.
Yeah.
The prophet, then the angel.
Right. The prophet obviously didn't have any success in turning them around, or there would have been no need for the angel of the Lord, perhaps, or things might have been different. So again, Israel was dealing with that issue. And again, this is back to the slide we talked about earlier, because I'm going to mention this a few more times, and then we'll just leave it alone, and I'll let you take from it what you think is the appropriate lesson from that. So again, Lord, 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 Jehovah in the green, and the Lord Adon in the yellow. And so verse 15, so he said to him, "O my Lord, how can I save Israel?" And again, that's that Adon word, not Jehovah. It's the Adon word. It says there in the previous verse, God spoke to him. And he said, "Oh Lord." So there's still a little disconnect between, is it God, or is it the angel of the Lord, and all that. And again, we don't know if we can answer. How can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house. Legitimate question. From a human standpoint, it's a legitimate question. We're the backward kin that nobody claims, is what he's saying. We're the people. We're at the bottom of the totem pole, and there's no way I can save you. But remember, he had just said, "I sent you, and you will do what? You will be victorious." Because it's not Gideon, it's not his place in society, it's not his status on the social ladder, it's because God's doing the fighting. And he could have, this sounds tacky, but he could have used a trained monkey or an untrained monkey and done the same thing, because it was God doing the fighting. And so Gideon is, why do you think he's questioning that? He's afraid. Does he have a right to be afraid? Yeah, Midianites are nasty people. And you're wanting me to go out and fight against them? Yeah, I would be scared too. And I think that's a normal response. Do you get fearful when you try to do evangelism, when you try to talk to somebody about the gospel? Sometimes you do. But what do? You do it anyway. You get through that fear. And that's what God is asking Gideon to do. Trust me, get past the fear, and see what I'm capable of doing for you. The Lord said to him, "Surely I will be with you, and you shall defeat the Midianites as one man." You will defeat the Midianites as one man. Now, how many ended up fighting total? 300, wasn't it? We'll talk about that when we get to it, whittle down from 30,000 to 10,000 to 300 and all of that. But you shall defeat Midian as one man. You're going to be the one who is the driving force of this. You're the one that's going to cause this to happen. Not because of you, because you're right, you are the least of your tribe, and the tribe is the least of these, because it's me that's going to be doing the fighting for you. Bob?
Gideon is God's favorite type of person to go out and fight his battles when he blows to the low.
Yeah.
And historically, he's always taken that person, and through the circumstance of what they do, they become great.
Yeah. Yeah, and so, God can use anybody. And God will use anybody, because it's not the character or the ability of the person, it's the ability of God. It's more so of Gideon said, "I've sent you, are you going to go?" And when Gideon says, "Yes, I'll go," then God said, "All right, we're done here. We just won. We hadn't even lifted a sword yet." Jim?
I was just thinking Gideon at least had the strength to thresh the wheat.
Yeah.
He's not at least so passive that he's not trying to do something.
Right. He had the courage to buck the system, didn't he? And get out there, and which he's surviving for his family. So that's what he's doing. Again, there's the Lord there, the Lord in the Yahweh sense in that particular verse. And then he said to him, "If now I have found favor in your sight, then show me a sign that it is you who talk to me. Do not depart from here, I pray, until I come to you and bring you my offering and set it before you." And he said, "I will wait until you come back." And so Gideon is, shall we say, sort of on board at this point. He's going to question, okay, I'm going to bring an offering. We'll see what happens with that. And then what's he going to do in a few verses? Yeah, the sign of the fleece. He said, if you really want me to do this, when I get up in the morning, the ground's going to be wet with dew and the fleece is going to be dry. Just like that. Happened just like that. Next day he said, well, wait a minute. This time just the fleece is going to be wet and everything else is going to be dry. Woke up the next morning and it was just that way. And so Gideon starts out on the smallest from the least tribe, and he's doubting and he's concerned and he's worried. And so he's putting God to the test. And what does God do every time? God passes that test because that's what God does. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into it. In fact, since the first bell is rung, why don't we just use that as our stopping point today? Then we'll get into this particular event that happens here and what happens in the next few verses and the test that he asks God to help him with. And Lord willing, we'll talk about that next week. Thank you.